Welcome to Stuff They Didn't Teach Me in Sunday School. What wisdom will you pass along to your kids before you die? What will you tell them that's really important? Will you tell them how to live? Will you talk to them about faith? Maybe my kids would like to know where the will is. What will you tell them? We come to the end of David's life. Here's a story that I know they didn't teach you in Sunday school. And even if you read it, you probably missed some of the nuances of it. It's in 1 Kings chapter 1. Now, King David was old and advanced in years, which is pretty much the same thing. And although they covered him with clothes, he could not get warm. Therefore his servants said to him, "Let a young maiden be sought for my lord the king, and let her wait upon the king and be his nurse. Let her lie in your bosom, that my lord the king may be warm." So they sought for a beautiful maiden throughout all the country of Israel, and found Abishag the Shunammite. What a great name. I hope she's better looking than her name. And brought her to the king. The maiden was very beautiful. She became the king's nurse and ministered to him, but the king knew her not. Here's what's happening. They do a beauty contest. Well, first of all, David can't get warm. I think it means David can't get warm in more ways than just temperature. David has not been involved with his harem for a while, and they're worried. Because you see, if you're impotent, sexually impotent, you can't be the king of a nation. So since David hasn't frequented the harem, they have a beauty contest. And let's see if we can find the most beautiful woman in all of Israel and see if we can get him sexually excited about her. So we're told that she laid with him in his bed, and when we're told at the very last line of verse 4, "But the king knew her not." That line, David had no sex with this Abishag. That line sets off a whole discussion of who's going to be the next king. Because obviously, it can't be David. David is not suitable to be king anymore in their way of thinking. So Adonijah exalts himself, makes himself king, one of David's sons, and some of David's advisors go after him. And now we have an interesting situation. Nathan comes to Bathsheba and says, "You need to go tell David that Solomon should be king." What's interesting is it was Nathan that went to David about the whole David-Bathsheba situation. So now we have, all of a sudden, Nathan and Bathsheba in cahoots to make sure Solomon sits on the throne. Bathsheba now goes into David and said, "Do you remember that you said that Solomon would be the next king?" I don't think David ever said that. It's not in the text. It never says in the text that David picked Solomon as the next king. I think Bathsheba's taking advantage of a doddering old man. And David said, "Oh yeah, I remember that. Yeah, I did say that." I don't think he remembers, and I don't think he said it. But Bathsheba and Nathan and Solomon are together in this thing to make sure that Solomon is the next king on the throne of Israel. In fact, God would bless that choice, but I don't think it was necessarily David's choice from a long time back. Solomon does set himself up as king. David does eventually die, and we are told that eventually David slept with his fathers in chapter 2, verse 10. Then David slept with his fathers and was buried in the city of David, that's Jerusalem. Before he died, on his deathbed, he has some instructions for Solomon. In chapter 2, he brings Solomon to him, and if you go, and first he talks about how you need to walk in the ways of Yahweh. That's a good deathbed message. And then in verse 5, the very last things he says, "Moreover, you know also what Joab the son of Zeruiah did to me." And verse 6, "Act therefore according to your wisdom, but do not let his gray head go down to Sheol in peace." Joab the general, who so often disobeyed David's commands, who so often was bloodthirsty and violent. And David says to Solomon, "Don't let him die of old age." And then in verse 8, and there is also with you Shimei the son of Gera the Benjaminite from Bahurim, who cursed me with a grievous curse on the day I went to Mahanaim. The same guy that stood on the mountainside on the Mount of Olives as David left the city of Jerusalem and threw rocks at him and cursed him. And in verse 9, David tells Solomon, you will know what you ought to do with him. You shall bring his gray head down with blood to Sheol. David's last words to Solomon are words of encouragement to follow God's commands, and then after that it's a hit list. Here is who you need to get rid of. You need to get rid of Joab, and you need to get rid of Shimei. You need to get rid of Joab because the man's dangerous, and you need to get rid of Shimei because the guy cursed me on the way out of town. And David died and rested with his ancestors, and every other king to follow would be measured against David. Not against David's goodness, not against David's lack of sin, not against David's faithfulness always, but against David's commitment to Yahweh and his commitment to being Yahweh's man. And every king to follow would be measured against that. God is good. God was good to David, and God brought him home to himself.